Hey, so I'm live. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining me on the planet. My name is June Allen. I'm a racial trauma therapist and I'm the founder of the Art of Greatness at juneallen.net. So today I want to talk to you about deprivation. Okay, I want to talk to you about self-deprivation in particular and how that relates to protection. Okay, how it relates to protection. And I've just been doing some work around the workshop that I'm having this Saturday around the art of receiving, and I'm just getting so many insights about so many different things. So I just wanted to jump on and talk about self-deprivation. But before I do that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of housekeeping and a little stuff about me if you don't know who I am. So as I said, I'm a racial trauma therapist. I'm also a business coach. What else am I? I'm a retreat facilitator, soon to be author. And I absolutely love what I do. I also run a mastermind. Hello. Hi, Wendy. Lovely to see you. So I also run a membership as well, run an online membership for Black women. And we are doing a lot of work in there at the moment around financial therapy and understanding what money trauma is and how your nervous system kind of relates to money and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really, it's really enlightening just learning about what's kind of happening in that. What else do I do? So I've got private practice as well, do one-to-one sessions. I also run workshops. Just kind of trying to finding different ways to be able to serve the community. People have different needs, clients have different needs, so I try and run a few different services so that I can serve the community. So the workshop that I've got going on this Saturday is called The Art of Receiving, and it is specifically about learning about your relationship to receiving. So if you struggle with, receiving relationships, if you struggle with receiving money, if you struggle with receiving compliments, if you struggle with self-acceptance and all of that sort of stuff, this workshop is going to be for you. It's a half-day retreat, actually. It's 2 workshops in one. The first one is we are going to be looking at your relationship to receiving. We're going to be looking at the blocks as well around what you find difficult about receiving. So we'll be looking at things like shame, money shame, and just shame in general and how that kind of blocks, what you do and how you behave and stuff like that around receiving. We're also going to be looking at some characteristics as well of deprivation and what that means and how that shows up. And you'll be given an opportunity to really discuss that at group level and just kind of dig a little bit deeper into what that means. The second workshop is going to be about specifically around money. So we're going to be looking at your relationship to money, and there'll be some exercises and stuff that we'll do as a group to be able to help you to understand your relationship to money, and about using the comparison between your relationships with people and how that relates to your relationship with money. So we're going to be exploring all of that on Saturday. It's in Brixton, so if you live in London and you want to come down, there's still tickets left. You can click the link in my bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. So again, if you want to work with me one-on-one, or whether you want to come to the workshop or join the mastermind as well, you can find all of the details about how you can do all of those things from the link in my bio. Right, so now let's get back to the content and the conversation today. So I was just kind of looking at deprivation and wanting to come on and explore and talk about the link between self-deprivation and also, hi Gloria, thanks for joining, and also how that relates to protection. Because I think the reason why I wanted to talk about this in particular today as well is because quite often when we think about deprivation, especially self-deprivation, the way that we deny ourselves our basic needs, there's a lot of shame and stuff like that around that particular concept, and none of us really want to admit or say out loud how we actually deny ourselves of our basic needs. And so I wanted to just come on and just talk about the importance of understanding that part of ourselves, that wants to deny us our basic needs, and looking at how that happens and why we do it and all of that kind of stuff. So when we look at it from a protection perspective, quite often that part of us that wants to deprive us of things, our basic needs, Okay, it is trying to protect us from something. Instead of just looking at or beating ourselves up because, you know, we are denying ourselves certain things. It's about understanding, okay, well, what is that part of ourselves trying to tell us? What is it? Why is it reacting the way that it's reacting? And the first thing that I'd say is that quite often when we deprive ourselves of certain things, sometimes it's about when you're feeling powerless over something. So you use depriving yourself as a way to regain control. Okay, let me say that again. When we deprive ourselves of something, quite often it's linked to some sort of traumatic thing that's happened, and we're trying to use the fact that we're trying to control ourselves, okay, as a way of trying to regain control. So an example of that might be food. Okay, an example of that might be food. Maybe you feel powerless in some sort of relationship that you're in. Maybe you feel powerless around, I mean, even looking at it from a social perspective, you know, how black women are treated in society. A lot of us, we feel powerless over being black women in society because we are at the bottom of the ladder, according to society, according to systems of oppression. Black women are on the bottom. So sometimes there might be those of us that feel so powerless, okay, under the system, that the only way that we can feel in control of our lives is to control our food, control what we eat. So we might just be thinking that we're obsessed with weight, okay? It might be that we think that we're obsessed with food, but I would ask you to maybe think in a more holistic view and think about, okay, if I'm trying to control my food, what is it that I'm really trying to control? What is it that I'm feeling that's actually out of my control? What am I feeling powerless about that I feel like the only thing that I have to control is my food? Okay, that's a very different conversation. That's a very different conversation rather than, you know, I'm trying to lose a few pounds. That's a very, very different conversation. So when you're feeling powerless about something, do you automatically go to your food? Either you're overeating or undereating. Okay, both very different sides of the coin, but it's the same coin. With your overeating or undereating. If you're overeating, it might be that you're trying to regulate. You're trying to regulate your nervous system. It might not always be healthy. This food might not be good for you, but in your own way, that part of you is trying to help you regulate your nervous system. Your nervous system is activated for whatever reason from the powerlessness that you might be feeling about the people, place, or thing. So you're overeating or undereating to try and regulate your nervous system. If you're undereating, it's probably more about it's fear of being seen. Actually, overeating can be the same as, actually, to be fair. You know, both of them can be about fear of being seen. So you sabotage yourself by overeating, or you sabotage yourself by undereating because you can't, being in the present moment and having to deal with the powerlessness that you feels overwhelming. So the only thing that you have to control is with your food. Yeah. So denying. Talking specifically about self-deprivation. Okay. So we deny ourselves of this nourishment because we feel so powerless. So it's almost like, as well, it's almost another way of us punishing ourselves. Not only are we trying to gain control, but it's also about we deprive ourselves because we're trying to we punish ourselves for having needs. And this can be a carryover from childhood stuff as well, actually. If you were raised in a home where you were denied things, you were denied love, you were denied affection, you weren't seen, you know, you were just an object, you know. And it feels harsh to say that, but for a lot of us, unfortunately, we were raised in families, you know, where we were just there sometimes we were there to look after the other children. Sometimes we were there because we were the scapegoat for the parents', you know, anger or whatever. We became the shame bucket and the anger bucket for the parent to kind of fling their anger around when they weren't feeling, you know, for whatever reason. So maybe you're a scapegoat, you know. So then we, you know, when we're raised in situations where we're not human, we then become the objects of other people. We then become the objects of other people to dump their rubbish on. So Wendy's saying, I feel that one, the fear of being seen, working with it. Yeah, listen, that fear of being seen, I think people underestimate that. People underestimate how that gets acted out. They really underestimate how that gets acted out. And as black women as well, you know, society says that we're not allowed to be seen. Being seen for us, we're not allowed. We're not allowed. We're just supposed to keep quiet and get on with it. So for us, being seen and being vocal about what our needs are and stuff like that can sometimes feel quite dangerous. So our nervous system, it can feel dangerous. And sometimes it literally has been dangerous. Sometimes it has literally been dangerous. If we open our mouth and speak up in our family as a child, maybe that could have resulted in violence. If we speak up in the workplace about certain things and make ourselves visible and be seen, we could risk losing our jobs. So there are elements of that. So I think when we think about our nervous system and when we think about self-deprivation, it really is about understanding or exploring and being curious about, you know, what is it that this behavior is trying to protect me from? When I deprive myself, what is that part of me trying to tell me? Is it trying to tell me that I feel safe? I feel unsafe in a relationship? Is it trying to tell me that this environment is unsafe? Okay, and being visible, like I said, whether it's at work or in your family of origin or in society, being visible in this society as a black woman has not always been safe. Doesn't always feel safe. So keeping ourselves small, depriving ourselves of certain things, you know, you can see why, if we've internalized any of those things from our family or society or whatever, it then becomes the place that feels quote unquote safe. Yeah, it then becomes the part of us that starts to feel safe. That behavior feels safe for us. And when we try and step out of that, or we try and go into situations where we start to receive things, it can feel really uncomfortable. The good stuff, the quote unquote good stuff that's supposed to make us feel good, feels awful. It feels awful because it's an emotional risk that we're having to take. Okay, that is in direct response to our deprivation behavior. It's in direct conflict. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. It's in direct conflict with our deprivation behavior. So that's why receiving can feel so awful. Initially, it feels awful for our nervous system because our nervous system gets activated when we start to be visible, when we start to be seen, when we start speaking up. This is why this thing takes, it has to happen over time. It has to happen over time because our nervous system needs to be able to feel comfortable in a space. It needs to start to feel comfortable before it can start to come out. And that you have to really pace yourself with that stuff. You can't just all of a sudden just start doing it, start being visible and start acting a certain type of way and thinking that it's going to be okay, because you're going to get burnt out very quickly. You're going to get burnt out very quickly. And as business owners, this is something that's really, really important about, you know, when you start to be more visible at work. And I know that for me, when I first started doing my work around being visible and doing this shame work and all of that kind of stuff, it took a long time. It's taken a long time for me to get to this place where I feel confident in myself as a therapist and starting to feel comfortable in who I am and confident in who I am as a person, because I had to let my nervous system gradually grow and gradually widen that window of tolerance. Yeah, gradually widen that window of tolerance so that so my nervous system can hold the fact that I'm being seen a lot more and not just kind of run back into my cave, you know, when people start responding to me being visible. Because that's the thing, you can show up and be visible in one aspect, and then but it's not just about you being able to show up and being visible in the moment. You have to be able to hold people's response to you being visible. You have to be able to hold your response to other people seeing you being visible. That means being able to take compliments. That means people may be judging you or criticizing you or whatever. And it might none of those things might have anything to do with you. It might be about the other person. Maybe it's because they're not used to you speaking up. And this is quite often what happens in families where, you know, if you've been scapegoated or whatever. I'm going to actually do a separate live stream on people being scapegoated, because I've been hearing this quite a bit, actually. I've been hearing this quite a bit. And yeah, when you're used to always being scapegoated and stuff like that, it's hard for you to then, when you start being visible, or you decide that you start going to put boundaries in so that you can't continue to be scapegoated by your family, you know, it can be very difficult, because then, you know, your sense of belonging gets threatened. Your sense of belonging gets threatened. Even though the environment is toxic, being isolated is also can be quite traumatic. Being neglected can be quite traumatic if it's in your family, or in you know, if you've been in a work environment for a long time and they start isolating you or whatever. That can be that stuff is painful. That stuff is painful. So you need to be able to, number one, understand what's happening to you. I think this is the problem with doing a lot of this work around self-deprivation and protection and being visible and stuff like that. If you're not aware of what's happening to you and why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, you're just going to go back into behaviors that you were doing before, and you'll end up just hiding. You'll end up continuing doing what you're doing because you don't know any other way. You don't know any other way to be. You don't know what's happening to you. You don't know why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. So your default is going to just go back to the behavior that you've always known, which is to deprive yourself and hide. Because that's what you've always done. That's what you learned as a child. That's what you learned growing up. That's what you learned in relationships. So you think, do you know what? This is what works for me. Even though it can be painful being isolated as well, depriving yourself, but at least you know what you know. At least you know what you know, and you can just keep doing that, because at least you know what the outcome is going to be. At least you know what the outcome is going to be by doing that. But there will come a time where you just want change, because it's not you know, feeling connected with another person, being visible, being seen and being heard. These are all natural human needs. These are all natural human needs. So depriving yourself and all of that it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. But it's also about understanding that this is also a response. This is also it's a defense mechanism. It's a protective behavior, okay, that you've had to adapt because of other stuff that's happened in your life, relationships that have been unsafe, abusive environments that have felt unsafe. So you've adapted this thing around depriving yourself. Like, if I don't have any needs, then it will be safer for me to do that. This is something that I learned as a child, unconsciously, obviously, but I learned that if I just don't have any needs, then I won't get in trouble. If I don't have any needs, then I won't get in trouble. If I don't bother my parents or talk to them about what I need or anything, or tell them when I'm upset, if I don't say anything, or if I don't talk about what my needs are, then that will make them happy, because it won't stress them out, and I won't feel like I'm being the difficult child. If I don't say anything, if I keep my mouth shut, then I won't be the difficult child. I'll be the good child, because I don't have any needs or wants. Oh, June's all right. She keeps her mouth shut. There's nothing wrong with her. She's fine. She's quiet. She's all right. And then they can stay in that fantasy. The parents can then stay in the fantasy, and I can stay in that fantasy myself, that everything is okay, because I don't know any different. It's something that I've adapted. I've adapted to it, and I'm used to it, and that's how I've survived, and that's how I've continued. But when you get to an adult and you start doing this inner work, you just really start to begin to realize just how neglected and how deprived I've been. And this is the realization that a lot of people, that I have with a lot of clients and stuff like that, because when they start to talk it out, they start to recognize, wow, like the crumbs and the deprivation that they end up giving themselves, because that's what they've internalized from others. And they know that something is wrong. They know that they're not being nourished, but they don't know how to. A lot of times we don't know how to ask for our need. We don't know what our needs are. We don't know how to ask for it, because we're so used to depriving ourselves, because we've learned that's the only way to be. That's the only way to be in relationship as a black woman, is to be needless and wantless. That's what we've been taught. The only way we're going to get any sort of recognition or seen by anybody is to be needless and wantless. Be a strong black woman, but also be needless and wantless. That's how the system expects us to be. That's how a lot of our families raised us to be as black women: needless, wantless, and strong. And we wonder why so many of us are unhappy, why we're feeling unfulfilled, why we're angry, because that stuff is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Meanwhile, inside us, you know, we hold on to the control, we hold on to, you know, we deprive ourselves of all of this stuff, and we don't trust. We don't trust. We don't trust. We don't trust him. We've got no faith left in humanity. We don't trust anybody, because we've learned from a very young age that people don't give a shit about black women. We learned from a very young age that society doesn't care about black women. Society doesn't care about us. So we internalize that society doesn't care about us, so we don't care about ourselves. Society doesn't care about us, okay? So we internalize that and decide that, well, I'm not going to bother caring for myself. And it can be a huge realization, you know, in recognizing just how much we deny ourselves. And because, and you know, it can feel really painful to start recognizing, actually, I want this. Actually, I desire that. Actually, I really want this. Because in order for you to really tap into what your needs are and what your desires are, you also have to risk being vulnerable. And that's why a lot of us don't want to go there. We don't want to go there with what our needs are. Because if we start vocalizing what we need, we also have to deal with the grief that comes with realizing that we've been neglecting ourselves for so long, and we've been neglected by people that were supposed to look after us. Especially when it comes to relationships. A lot of us deprive ourselves of you know, nourishing relationships, whether they're love relationships, friendships, or whatever, because a lot of us are so traumatized by what happened to us in childhood, and our caregivers weren't able to provide for us the way that they were supposed to. So we end up neglecting ourselves, and then it becomes protection, that we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable in relationships. We don't allow ourselves to be loved. We don't know how to let other people love us, because we're so traumatized by the neglect and the deprivation that our parents inflicted on us. A lot of people will, you know, a lot of times we can talk about the physical abuse and stuff like that that we received, but not a lot of us talk enough about the neglect, the deprivation that a lot of us have suffered, the ignoring, the not being seen, the being left to get on with it, the parentification. All of that stuff is all forms of neglect. It's all forms of neglect. The fact that some of our parents had so many children and couldn't look after them, you know, it's a form of neglect. It's a question that I've always asked myself that question. I don't understand why there are families that are, you know, the parents kept having all these children, knowing that they can't afford to have them. Why keep having them? It's always something I've always wanted to ask my parents' generation, and my parents as well, actually. Why is it they keep having children if they can't afford them? It don't make no sense. You know, it don't make no sense, because it's a lot more financial. It's almost stressful for them. And it's stressful for children to be raised in a home where they're not being cared for and nourished. So it doesn't make sense to keep having to having these large families where these children are out here being neglected. It doesn't make no sense. You know, it's something that, you know, it's important to really think about these things, because, you know, when there is large families, you know, there's less stuff. There's less stuff to go around. There's less to go round if it's a big family, which just creates more deprivation and more dysfunction, because the parents just can't hold. They can't hold all of the responsibilities, the emotional responsibilities, in particular. You know, it's one thing to kind of you know, to provide home and shelter and clothes and all the rest of it, but it's something else to provide emotional support when you've got a large family. It's just impossible to be able to do that when you've got a large family, which makes it even more traumatic for the children. It makes it even more traumatic for the children. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, so when you think about, I'm gonna have to wrap up now because I've got a client at 1 o'clock. But when you think about, you know, the whole idea of self-deprivation, you know, be curious with yourself about what that means for you and why you do it. What are you trying to protect yourself from? What are the stories that you tell yourself that if you start to speak up about what you need and what your desires are, what are your fears around doing that? Because the self-deprivation continues because there's a fear of what might happen if you allow yourself to be. You have to be vulnerable. Again, you know, coming out of that self-deprivation requires you to be vulnerable, and it requires you to be honest about your own neglect and deprivation, whether it's come from family or whatever. You know, so having the self-awareness around that is an important part of learning how to receive. This work is about learning how to receive. Learning how to receive and understanding not just your relationship to receiving, but your relationship to deprivation. That is also just as important. You've got to learn about understanding your relationship to deprivation, why you deny yourself, why you're only giving yourself crumbs, why you neglect yourself the way you do, why you're not taking care of yourself. And that could be physically, emotionally, spiritually, so many different ways for you to care for yourself. But a lot of us have this compulsive deprivation, and it's almost like it's a form of self-annihilation almost, you know, and it's that can be low self-esteem. There's so many layers to unpack around it. But it's important to be curious about it. If you find yourself in a place where you find it really, really difficult to nourish yourself, to care for yourself, to keep your promises, there's a conversation to be had with yourself around what that's about. If you live in London and you want to join me for the Art of Receiving workshop on this Saturday, the 15th of July, you can click the link in my bio. Go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. In the half day retreat, again, like I was saying at the beginning, you'll have an opportunity to explore your relationship to receiving and to also explore your relationship to money and how that, you know, we're going to be doing some nervous system work. We're going to be doing some immersive practices to help you, you know, understand, you know, what's going on in your body when it comes to receiving and learning how to receive, and what are the blocks are that keep you from really, you know, receiving the life and the support and the love that you deserve. Okay, any other questions that you might have about anything that I've shared today, drop them in the comments, or you can send me a DM, or you can email me info@yardofgreatness.com. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.